Hello, hello. Just waiting for Aaron to get on.
Happy Monday, guys. Hey, Aaron.
Hey, how are ya?
Doing pretty good. I think I had too much coffee today, though.
I woke up with a headache, so I've been nursing my tea all morning.
Oh, man. That's the worst.
It is.
Well, I think that we should probably just dive right in. I know you and I have been like chomping at the bit to talk about this subject. And it's finally here. And I know that it's exciting and scary at the same time. But I just wanted to kind of ease into it because I feel like this conversation can go for hours.
Yeah.
We can go down the rabbit hole. So I figured I would just kind of tell everybody like how we came to want to do this podcast. Mine's not quite as in depth as yours because I didn't do it for a living, So I'll just go ahead and kind of start sharing about, the phone call that we had. I don't know, when was that, in December or November?
Yeah, I think back in November.
Something like that. So it all came about, I guess, because even though I just sell supplements and topicals, I have always been on the nutrition path to try to balance and complete recipes just for my own dog, just for my own knowledge. And it was something that I have kind of wanted to dabble into. Like I kind of had plans to start raw food like in a commercial way. Mm-hmm. And so I headed down the path trying to, I wanted to make sure that I was doing it right. Because I know a lot of the commercial foods out there, they're not complete and balanced, and they're sourcing garbage, animals. And so that kind of led me down the path of taking nutrition course after nutrition course after nutrition course. And I was getting frustrated because it was the same information over and over, just, regurgitated in a different way. And so I was taking a course that I really, truly did love. It met all the questions that I had, and it actually taught me how to formulate properly. But after
that's kind of something to point out, is a lot of these courses that people are really holding to kind of high standards.
Yeah.
They're teaching nutrition fundamentals, but yes, not necessarily how to implicate it and how to formulate with it. That's kind of a skill that a lot of people that do the same thing I did for years, you kind of have to self-teach yourself after taking some of these courses, because that's not an aspect of them.
Right. And so that's what I was searching for. So I kept taking course after course after course. And then that's when I called you, and I was just like, how do I know how to properly formulate? And because anybody can take, pay $300 and get a super basic nutrition course and be certified in canine nutrition. And I think that's kind of a slippery slope, because it's pretty easy to pass these certification courses. And so anybody can
most of them are only maybe 200-hour course or so, and we're putting a lot of weight on something that's kind of a little tiny course, not really a long course, not a very in-depth course even, It's kind of a lot of weight to put on a 200 hours of your life.
Yeah. I remember the first nutrition course I took I think I did it in a weekend. So then that's when, I called you and I was like, listen, I'm not here. I'm not going to like name names. I'm not going to name the course or anything, but it turned out that I had spent all this money and all this time on this course that the course itself was not even accredited. So the certification that I did receive, it didn't mean anything anyways at the end of the day. So that led to our conversation. And that's when you kind of put the light bulb in my head that it's like, listen, like, that doesn't, you having a certification doesn't make you any smarter than anybody else who, you know, hasn't done their own research themselves. And so, and I was just like, ding, ding, ding. Like I experienced that in the military. Just because somebody is, you know, has a bachelor's degree, they're automatic, or they can go and become an officer and they have higher rank, but it doesn't mean that they know more than somebody who's enlisted or hasn't had their bachelor's. Like we almost had more respect for the enlisted side than we did the officer side, even though they technically had more education behind them. So I appreciate you kind of bringing me back down to reality.
Well, I mean, there are people, some of the better diet formulators in this industry will straight up tell you, I've never taken one of those courses that people are kind of holding at these high respects. We live in this age where you can really learn anything to any degree that you really want to if you put in the time and put in the effort to do it. And honestly, the most valuable skills that I used in the time that I've been formulating weren't anything that came from those courses. I legitimately feel like I wasted thousands of dollars and years. I mean, I took a 2-year course. Initially, a clinical nutrition course, and that consumed, well, I took 2.5 years, which was as long as you got to finish it. And it took me that almost full 2.5 years to finish it. But the skills that I use in the day-to-day work, and not a whole lot of it came directly from that course, which is kind of frustrating.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the course that I had asked you. I was like, man, I'm not finding what I need. Should I take that course that you were taking? And you were like, just don't waste your time and your money. So that conversation kind of led to what we're seeing in the raw food movement, because everything you see has to be complete and balanced. And if you don't, your pet, you know, you're gonna ruin your pet, especially puppies. There's so much scare tactic with feeding your puppies a complete and balanced daily meal. And if you don't, you're going to ruin their life.
And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the more you learn, I mean, nutrition is intensely complex.
Oh, yeah.
We as humans don't even fully understand the complexity of nutrition for ourselves, let alone animals. So a lot of that fear, it's very easy to generate that fear when you start diving into how complex nutrition is. But it's ironically kind of that complexity of nutrition that also makes it virtually impossible for us to achieve what we're kind of trying to achieve in some sort of perfection that really doesn't exist there.
Right. Absolutely. And so another thing I wanted to make clear to everybody too is that our way of thinking isn't the only way to do anything. Again, we're not here to bash people who want to feed, you know, complete and balanced. If someone feels like that's the best way to feed their pet, by all means do it. But Erin, you know, you and I, we've just seen a trend that it's scaring people away from even wanting to attempt raw, because one, not only do you practically have to be a nutritionist to feed your pet that, then you're going to have to pay somebody for all these recipes. Just like I, you know, posted yesterday, I'm all for people or charging people for your services. Absolutely 100%. But when you think about it, you're only getting 1 to 2 recipes every time and you can spend between 150 to however much. And then you're going to have to keep repeating that cycle. Whoops. So before you know it, you're just thousands of dollars in the hole just trying to buy complete and balanced recipes.
And that's one of the things I've always struggled with doing the formulations with people is, you know, how do I convey to them? Because I've never been somebody who's been pushing that one recipe, although it is technically complete and balanced, that does not in itself make for a balanced overall diet. That makes for a balanced recipe on a piece of paper that your vet likes to see. Maybe it makes you feel really comfortable because it shows you that everything your dog or your cat needs is in that recipe. But a balanced diet incorporates a lot more than just a single recipe. I mean, even if you're feeding balanced commercial food, the body still needs to get variety in it. It needs to get nutrients from different sources. It's not an overall healthy lifestyle, but how do you, as somebody like myself that was formulating diets, convey that to somebody? Like, so you need to purchase multiple recipes. That, I mean, it was bothering me. And I would have clients that would. I mean, I have people that have bought a dozen recipes, but my gosh, you can't ask somebody to do something like that. Right. And you shouldn't have to. And so that's, I don't want to go off on that yet, but but you know, I mean, that was something that I struggled with as somebody who did this for a living for years. How do you, I mean, and I would always give people options as much as physically possible within a recipe as far as using a variety of things, because it never felt really right to just say specifically follow this amount of this every day, all day. That's, I mean, I've known from the beginning that that's not an optimal way for anything to eat. And that's one of the reasons that getting pets off of the same day-to-day thing in kibble, we moved to this type of feeding to get away from that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. And, I mean, exactly what you said. And when I talked, or I guess I had my interview with Gussie's Gut, Rob and Dr. Ian Billinghurst, we didn't really go into nutrition in my little interview, but it sparked my interest in what Dr. Billinghurst was saying in his book. And so, you know, that led me down the path of watching his presentations back from the 80s. And I was just like, man, it's so simple to feed your pet. And it doesn't have to be, you know, the daily balance, and you can do it over time, because throughout evolution, that's how they were fed. You know, it's only been, you know, until recently that we've gone on this
everything eats. That's how every living thing on this planet eats, technically a balanced over time method of feeding. I mean, nothing eats perfect. There is no perfect. Nothing eats perfect every single day. It's such an odd concept that we've even kind of gone down this road, when that's just an unnatural way for anything to ever eat.
It's like you don't have a spreadsheet to feed your horse or your cattle or your goats or your snakes. Like, they literally get their balance over time. So yeah, I guess it's just, we get sucked into, like, we get the blinders on, because like you said, I think it's, people want to perfect things. And we also get inspired by others and influenced by others. And so when you find somebody that you really trust and really believe in, you tend to, you know, mimic what they do. And I think that's kind of what happened in our industry, is we have certain, not influencers, but we have certain influences that we tend to follow. And so before you know it, we're all like sucked into this tunnel vision of, we have to feed complete and balanced. And
the kibble industry, I mean, the pet food industry in general has put that fear of God into people. Yeah. That it needs to be complete and balanced. And, you know, because we have to come up with something that's technically got everything necessary for life in that bag if you're going to feed kibble. We're kind of trying to apply those rules to feeding food, and it's kind of two different worlds. It's not the same.
It really is. Because, and, you know, we can talk about AFCO and all that, which I know that we'll go on our other episodes, but I mean, that's really what the complete and balanced is based on, right? It's trying to meet those AFCO
we had to establish guidelines for dogs and cats. If you're going to put something in a bag and you're going to say this is all you need to eat to live, there has to be some sort of guidance to follow. You have to know a general idea, at least, of what nutrients and how much, and how, if there's a such thing as too much, or if there's a such thing as too little of something for them to survive off of. It's about survival when it comes to packaging a, you know, a food like kibble. And you can't really take that same philosophy and apply it to food, because food and, you know, buying a bag of kibble and eating real food is kind of, they're two different worlds. And that's, I think it's that fear that the whole industry that is pet nutrition of the world today with kibble has put that fear into people, because everything has to be complete and balanced. And you hear even people say, well, it's better to feed a kibble than it is to feed an imbalanced raw diet. I've never said that, but I hear it said a lot. And it's kind of misleading, because what is considered balanced within that bag is, again, it's balanced on a piece of paper, and it's balanced using possibly things that your pet can't even utilize. I mean, protein from corn is not the same as protein from beef. That it's apples and oranges, but we're making a lot of comparisons as though you can do that when you really can't.
Yeah. And again, we can go down the rabbit hole, but we'll put that off for later. But so that's kind of like, that's kind of where I'm coming from at my change of heart with doing the complete and balance to now balance over time. It's what is written on paper is totally different than trying to feed the dog in front of me and using, you know, dried kibble versus whole fresh raw foods. They're apples and oranges. It just didn't make sense to me. And so, you know, again, just watching Dr. Billinghurst's podcast and reading his book and all this, it literally is just common sense. And I just saw so many people getting so frustrated and not even wanting to give raw a chance, because it's so intimidating. It's so overwhelming. There's so much information floating around there. And I just want to bring it back to the basics, you know, excuse me. And so that's, you know, kind of where I had my change of heart. It's more of just seeing through how our pets were fed evolutionary wise to how they've been fed over the past 100 years. And also, you know, just talking to you and kind of seeing what's going on, you know, Instagram and just talking to people. For you, it's entirely different, because you did this for, you know, a business for almost 5 years now. And I just want to say that I think so highly of you, and I think that it takes so much integrity, and it says so much about your character that you aren't just stuck with one way of thinking. And you can own it, you know, by saying, I have changed my way of thinking and my thought process. And I hope that people can see that and respect that you're able to say, like, hey, what I did 5 years ago, I don't believe that anymore. And this is why. I think when people, if you're the same person that you were 10 years ago, you've done absolutely no growth. You're doing a disservice to the people around you and yourself, because you're just stuck on this one hill to die on. This is the one way to feed, and this is it. It's my way or the highway. Yeah. And I don't think it should.
There's a lot of that going on in this community, though. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of my way or the highway in various aspects. People get very oddly passionate about this subject for some reason.
They do. I know.
Yeah, so I've never seen anything like it in any other industry that I've been involved in.
Yeah. And so yeah, I wanted to tell you that I think it takes a lot of guts to do, you know, what you're doing, and I totally respect it.
Well, I mean, I can't deny things if I'm observing things, because I'm a very observational, and I've never been somebody who's fallen hard on the side of, even though I did formulate diets, I've always been a very keep one foot on like the side of nature and respecting how that works, as well as combining the science of nutrition. I've never fallen real hard on one side or the other. And I've made observations that I'm an observational person. I have this little notebook that I have kept over the past 2 years, notes of different things that I've just observed over and over again with dogs and cats, both coming from eating more of a rotational, not so much spreadsheet involved diet, a varied diet. And then the scaremongering of maybe my pet might be deficient, so should I switch to feeding something that's more balanced on paper? I want to know. So I was analyzing diets. And of course, a lot of things that people are feeding, the nutritional data isn't an accurate reflection even of the food itself.
Right.
So things will come up short. And everybody, I think at this point, has kind of heard the list of things that your diet's going to be deficient in. And there's ways of using food or using supplements to then cover those gaps. I just started to notice things that didn't make sense to me. Like, why is it somebody who was feeding a good variety of food previously, now they're adding in things that maybe aren't technically species appropriate foods? Maybe they're adding in some synthetic vitamins to cover things that they were afraid they were missing. Why are these animals, after being on this, having more issues than they were before? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. And It's not every animal, it's not all the time, but to me it was an undeniable higher percentage than it should have been, showing symptoms of things not being quite right. Like, you're messing with things, I think, that we don't know enough about to really be trying to take over with food.
Well, and that's
so I have that notebook filled with all these notes of different things, and it started to really get to me the past few years. Like, something about it doesn't feel quite right. Like, there's certain nutrients that it doesn't matter how much variety you feed on paper, we're never meeting them. That didn't make sense to me as just a logically thinking person. How is a dog or a cat going to get this? If I can't make sense of it, I'm like that person who's like, I have to make it make sense. You know, I need to dig and figure it out, because, you know, if I'm taught that I have to feed, you know, certain amount of zinc every single day, or my dog or my cat's going to develop a deficiency. But if there's no food in the spectrum of what they would eat that could ever potentially fill that, we have to start asking questions. That doesn't make sense.
Right. And that was a big red flag to me too. It's like, these dogs aren't typically eating oysters. They're not typically eating mussels. No. And so they have to be getting it from their environment. And I understand that, you know, what wild dogs and all that were eating depended on where the settlers were and what they were raising and gathering and hunting. And so some dogs, you know, got more fish, and they may have had shrimp and mussels and stuff, but other dogs in, you know, northern Canada, they're eating
there are other
dogs
that
carcasses.
Would never have access to that.
Yeah, never.
Cats don't happen to like water much. They're not going in fishing for an oyster.
Right. So that, and so again, it's more common sense to me now. Like, we should feed them more in a common sense way than trying to put something on paper. And so that was a big red flag. And it's almost ironic, because I was always taught that my specific breed of dog, a Labrador, needed more zinc. And so I was making sure to add in, you know, the oysters, and that he had the zinc, but he ended up having more issues with like dry skin and dandruff than when I fed him just a balance over time meal. And then so then, you know, I would go back to my nutritionist and be like, listen, I'm still having a hard time balancing this because he's still having dandruff or dry skin or whatever. And, you know, and then we go down the rabbit hole of, well, just add more oil or add more fish and add more this and add more that. And before you know it, I have more supplements than I do actual food. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't make sense.
I mean, it's crazy, even just in the time that we've been present on here looking at bowls. It was kind of rare when I first started posting pictures of my own dog's food to see a lot of supplements being thrown in bowls. And now it's like every other one is, I mean, I see bowls with more supplements than there is food in there. Mm-hmm. And I know it's like just that scare, like they're scared that something's missing in there. And sometimes it is. I mean, there are situations where something could be missing. I'm not saying that's not possible, but just we're getting to a point where I actually was starting to see more people come in over supplementing, and then they're creating problems because they're over supplementing, trying to compensate for something that they really didn't need to be doing in the first place. And, you know, when you start throwing in isolates of anything, you automatically throw off a natural antagonistic and synergistic balance that goes on in the body. And I don't think people are talking about that enough. People are more concerned that maybe it's not there, so I'm going to throw it in just in case. And that's kind of scary.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that a lot too. And another thing, you know, that you've already touched on that's not being talked about is how you, being a formulator, have seen healthy dogs on a complete and balanced recipe start to have health issues. Like there's nobody else in the industry that's even mentioning that. But I know
kind of is weird to me because I don't know how anyone else doing this couldn't possibly see it. To me, I just don't. I don't know. Actually, there's one other person that I speak to that does this, that just started doing this work, and she's already noting, like she's taking notes that like the same type of thing that I spent a couple of years doing, and she's noticing the same thing, but doesn't really know how to, you know, how do we go out and like talk about it, because there's so much conflicting information of people out there saying, if you're not doing this, you're doing it wrong, you're hurting your animal.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing that I was noticing is that, you know, I don't know as many nutritionists as you do, but I know a handful. And it was almost like when I talked to every single one of them, they would always blame the other nutritionist. Like,
oh my God, yes. I just tell people to stop. I'm like, just stop right there, because I feel like a lot of people just bounce around and then just come to unload their shit from the last one onto you. And everything they did is the reason there's something wrong with their dog, and it's now your job to fix it. And if you don't fix it, then they're going to move on to the end. Yeah, it's a big thing. It's a thing that I would deal with on a daily basis. And I just kind of shut that down with people, because it's not my, every person that formulates works differently too. Yes. So it's not like we're all following the same guideline and we're following the same nutritional guideline, but the way we go about doing it, I mean, can be completely different between people.
Yes. And so, and again, and that's almost kind of like more proof to show that because you're meeting all these nutritional needs, all of these nutritionists are meeting the needs on a spreadsheet, yet they're all having different outcomes. You know, some dogs do fine on it, but a lot of them don't, and they have to bounce from nutritionist to nutritionist. So even though they are meeting the complete and balanced nutrient requirement, they're still having issues down the road. Mm-hmm. So that is a red flag to me that that's not the way to go, you know?
Yeah.
And hopefully other people can see that too. So for you, I know, you know, you've been wanting to talk about this for a while. And so through your work, you were just seeing, I guess, unhealthy dogs with your notebook over time, and you were just like, this is a red flag. We need to talk about it. Why is nobody talking about it? Why do you think nobody's talking about it?
Well, I mean, I kind of went off on my own with my own dog and formulated for him very precisely for kind of a short window. And it just, so many things about it weren't making sense to me. And so my own dog has eaten everything from precisely balanced, NRC balanced recipes to whole prey and everything in between his entire life. And honestly, his first year as a puppy was prior to me getting really into balancing, following nutritional guidelines. I was conscious of certain things. You know, I was always scared about the calcium too much with the dog as a puppy.
Yeah.
And so there were things that I definitely configured in there, but I wasn't precisely following any specific recipes for him when he was a puppy, when he was growing. So there again, just that kind of seemed a little over the top as far as we're scaring people into saying you can't feed them any other way than to feed something that is known on paper. But again, we have to get away from that, because it's known on paper, but it's not even an accurate, we got to get out of that mindset. It's not an accurate representation. I could formulate a diet on a piece of paper that is absolutely, looks perfect, right? Down to the gram of every single ingredient is absolutely perfectly balanced. All of your minerals and everything are all perfect in balance with each other. But that same recipe, I could give it to 10 different people that source 10 different places.
Oh, yeah.
The
entirely
food
different.
is never, not
The
one
same.
of those people is ever going to put food in a bowl that's going to precisely provide exactly what that piece of paper says.
Yeah.
And I think there's a huge disconnect in this community in general about that. Food doesn't work that way. Food is not, unless you're using all supplements, food is never that perfect. It just doesn't work that way. We're trying to perfect something that nature doesn't do perfect. Like, it doesn't work that way. Yeah. And then the needs of dogs and cats, we have guidelines we follow. What we say they need, recommended allowances daily for what is in an ideal situation, how much they should be taking in. But the needs aren't static either. Needs change daily just as much as the nutrients in the food change all the time. Yeah. It's never the exact same. You don't wake up every day and need exactly 15 milligrams of zinc today, and at the 24-hour mark, you suddenly need it again. It doesn't work that way. Like, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. And like, I'm so glad we're talking about this, because it's not something that like the average person thinks about, you know, is that what this cut of beef, what this cow ate, where it was located at is going to be entirely different than the one that's right next to it. Eating the same thing in the same environment. You know what really
got me on the whole nutrient composition of food was I followed along with this nutrient densities project. There was like an independent thing that was ran last year, and it took all these people from all over the country that raised cattle, and they had them send in soil samples, manure samples. They had to give detailed descriptions of what the climate was like and the diet was like of all these different cattle raised in different areas, pastured. Now, none of these were like feedlot animals. These were all people feeding relatively natural diets, supplementing a little bit with grains, some of them, not all of them, but some of them did. And then at the end of this study, they took and they sent in the samples at the end of the year of the meat from these cattle. And they did an in-depth analysis on each animal. And they all came back different. Now, a pastured cow on one side of the country versus a pastured cow on the other side of the country might have come back. And then they were all wildly different from that data that we're pulling out of USDA. It's like, it's almost like a crapshoot using that data, because is it reflective of what you're actually feeding? Probably not.
Who knows?
Probably not.
Yeah.
I mean, that data when they updated that last with beef, they took carcasses from like 2 slaughterhouses and they trim them and they like blend. It's a weird process. They trim them of all the fat. They trim them of all that connective tissue so that you're not even, I mean, the fat, fat is fat. They add that in as fat percentage, and we know what's in fat. They test to some degree vitamin content in fat, but we kind of just generally use fat as fat. We know what it is. So they test like the muscular tissue, but they take off all of that connective tissue, all the stuff that like we're probably feeding our dogs.
Right.
We're not getting an accurate even representation of what's in that. We know that things like manganese are likely contained in some of that connective tissue because every other nutrient is found where it's used most in the body. So we're not even getting a really accurate description of what is even in that food. They blend it up, they freeze it. I mean, it's a weird process that they even do to analyze the food. And then it's such a small sample. I think they're only required to get 10 to 20 samples of any given food to come up with.
That's crazy.
Yeah, to come up with this information that we're following and like putting so much weight on. But that nutrient density study, that independent study, it's like an independent study that's trying to help people find, because nutrient depletion is an issue anymore. Soils.
Oh yeah.
So they're trying to help people figure out, because they do this with produce too, so they figure out where in the country you can find the most nutrient dense apple, where, you know, like where is it grown, how is it grown, so that we can learn from that and maybe improve it. That's like the philosophy behind that group. But the beef thing I found so interesting because there were, you know, concentrations of zinc in some of that beef that, I mean, beef is one of the few things, if you put it into a spreadsheet, that you might be able to get to that level that we say dogs and cats need. And it was high, like it was so high in some of those that it was like, it would be like so simple to cover it, you know?
Yeah. And even like when you go to the USDA food database, like you're not going to be able to find a lot of the foods that we're going to feed our pets anyways. I know, like I had to ask you for like the rabbit content, you know, because it's not out there.
I've wasted, oh my God, I don't even want to think about how many hours of my life I've wasted searching for data of things that we feed our pets that people, because if people don't eat it, the data's hard to find. I've contacted zoos and like they've got a little bit more information because they have to feed animals weird stuff that we don't eat. But my God, the amount of time I have wasted in my life trying to come up with this information. And then the data, again, we're using data. I was able to get you a bunch of bone data, but again, that's an incredibly small sample of what's been tested. And we're not even including the entire profile of that bone, because we know that there are things within bone that we're not testing. We're not testing the marrow in the bone when we get a bone in us. We're just getting that calcium phosphate number, a little bit of magnesium, where it's not even an accurate picture of what's in that bone.
Yeah, not at all. So yeah, again, I mean, it's all of these things that the average pet owner doesn't even start to think about at all. And then, so when they hear repeatedly over and over, it has to be complete and balanced, it has to be complete and balanced, they're just going to think that that's the way that it has to be, because that's the way it's marketed. And it shouldn't be that way. It really shouldn't. It should not. You shouldn't have to obtain a certificate and know, you know, what vitamins and minerals your dogs need and cats need. You just need to know how to balance. Like, you need to know what foods they should feed.
There's some structure. You need a little bit of structure. You need a little bit of guidance, but you don't need the degree and the spreadsheet. You don't need that.
No.
And that doesn't even, I think people need to understand that it's giving people what I think is a false sense of security and thinking that they're getting everything because it says so on the piece of paper, when that's not even, I mean, it's not even you know, it's not comparable. It's not accurate, to be honest.
Yeah. And I think, like, I hear all the time that people's vets, you know, don't support raw. And I fully understand that, because a lot of the times that people, like when they try to feed home cooked diets or homemade diets, they're putting in the wrong things. But I see a lot of people have come to me that have rice in the bowl. They have a little bit of meat, they have a ton of peas, a ton of carrots, they got potatoes, and I can definitely see why their vet would be totally turned off on that, because that is not what your pet should
Google
be eating.
it, and you'll find just recipe after recipe online from people that's rice with some little bit of meat and a bunch of vegetables in there, and they're calling it a balanced diet.
Yeah, it's not.
No.
So I think trying to help people realize that, you know, it doesn't have to be complicated. You just need a solid foundation on what to be feeding. And it doesn't even have to be like, I don't weigh out my food anymore. I haven't
weighed Dexter's food, and I don't even know the last time I weighed. I was telling Mariah that the other day. She asked me something, and I said, I don't even weigh his food. I know, like, precisely how much just from doing it. I mean, I'm pretty good at eyeballing. I did that once. I eyeballed out his food and then ran it through just to see how close it was. And it's like, it covered everything. But, you know, so I guess I had that advantage. But honestly, it doesn't take a lot of time of you even getting a general idea and following some general guidance to be able to do the same thing without having to understand any sort of nutritional philosophies, or, you know, by all means, if you're into it, learn it.
Go for it.
Like, it's not required. You certainly can feed your dog. You can feed yourself. I mean, I guess I find it weird because I have kids, and you probably think the same thing too. Like, did you ever think about that stuff with your kids when, you know,
No. You know, and that's funny too, because, well, not funny, I guess ironic. Because, you know, we're talking about the food, like the nutrients in each individual food and how it's different, and how our soil isn't as good as it used to be. And so we're probably not getting the nutrients that we used to be getting. And so we do have to kind of supplement in certain areas. And so that's why people take multivitamins. And so I thought there was, you know, no harm in doing that. When COVID hit, I just gave, you know, our kids a daily multivitamin. And unfortunately, I think that it caused a kidney stone in our youngest daughter. But that just goes to show that, like, just because one person or one pet is going to be okay, you know, feeding a certain supplement to try to fill in the gaps, it doesn't mean that they're all going to have the same outcome.
Yeah. This supplement rabbit hole was something long before I ever even thought of getting involved in pet nutrition. I fell down that rabbit hole deep just because my mom was one of those people that always, like, gave me, because I had a shitty diet as a kid. I was a picky eater. So she would give me vitamins all the time. And as I got older and I moved out, I stopped taking all that when I moved out of the house. And then I started thinking about it when my daughter was born, like, because she was kind of a picky eater when she was little too. And so I kind of started thinking about that. And then I dove down that supplement hole, like, deep and started learning about, and ironically, that's one of the appeals to me with feeding a raw diet, was getting away from all the supplements, all of that synthetic garbage that's in kibble, because I was dead set that I didn't want that in my body or my kids' body. It was about food, like whole food supplements. We use whole food supplements in our house, but, like, I don't use synthetic supplements with myself or my kids. So it didn't make sense to me to start throwing them at my dog and my cat. So that was, like, one of the initial appeals to me with this diet, was that the nutrition's coming from the food, where, like, whole food, not from something that is fortified with all these synthetics in order to make it complete. that was like a huge turn on for me of this way of feeding in general, because that's kind of how I am with my own self and my kids.
Yeah.
I felt it. And then the supplement industry to me parallels the kibble industry a lot, in the way that in even the human supplement world, there's a lot of marketing and a lot of BS and a lot of not so great practices. And, you know, it's like a whole nother subject. You can dive down that hole. I fell down that deep. So for me, that all of that information was like 20 years before I ever even started thinking about pet nutrition. So that kind of carried over for me. So yeah, a lot of that it's just not something that resonated with me when I started seeing a lot of supplements being thrown in on top of food. It just, you know, that's not how I learned to feed myself or my kids. So it just didn't really resonate. And it's an industry that you really need to dive into to learn exactly just how great. I mean, it's so similar in so many ways to the pet food industry. I mean, supplements have their place. We have done amazing things with supplements. We have, you know, solved nutritional crises with supplements, but there is a place, a time and a place. And then you also need to dive in, if you get into supplements, where they come from and companies. And it's a lot like the kibble industry, and that all these big companies, they're all owned by the same people. A lot of them are owned by Mars, and people, it cracks me up in this community when I see people talking about, oh, I would never feed this food because it's owned by Mars. And then they're throwing the supplements from the companies on top. And I'm like, those companies are owned by Mars. You know, like, I don't know.
It's really scary how much Mars owns. It is. Oh my God. It's that's crazy. So, what was I going to say? I was going to ask you. Like you were saying, I think that there's always a time and a place for conventional medication. I think that there's a time and place for complete and balanced. And I think therapeutic recipes are definitely one of those areas that I think if your pet is in renal failure, like you helped me with my cat. I had him on that diet for a really long time. Now I'm less structured with it because I know more what I'm doing. I'm not feeding him kibble. And I can definitely see that it's improved his health. So, so you're going to keep doing therapeutic recipes? Is that right?
Yeah. And I do most of the therapeutic stuff I do a lot of voluntary work with like rescues and whatnot with dogs, people, you know, dogs that are in dire situations, cats that are in dire situations. There's definitely a place for very precise nutrition and targeted, you know, with health conditions. I'll do that. I'll continue to do all of that. But as far as healthy dogs and cats go, they just don't need it. I can't continue to do it when I know they don't need it. And although there are plenty of people that are still going to want it, and that's fine. Like I want to really emphasize that, because just because I'm not going to do it doesn't mean that, you know, if that's your level of comfort, then by all means continue to do that. I'll gladly recommend someone else that I know that does it to do it for you. But I'm just not going to do it, because to me, I can't see a good reason to continue to do that for people, when I would rather educate them on how they can feed a much more, what I would call an actually balanced diet, which includes variety. The body doesn't need the same exact thing every single day. And I know for a fact that it can be done, and done in a healthy way. You know, it's not needed. It's just not needed. So for me, and that was a big decision for me, because that was honestly like just regular healthy dogs and cats, formulating diets for them. That's probably about 75% was my business. So I've cut that out, and there's like 75% of my income gone too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, if that doesn't say that it doesn't, it's not as important as people are making it out to be. And I've been accused of over the years, because there are people who have always said, well, it's just because there are people who are making money off of it that it's so important. And it's those people that are really making it sound important. I don't want to be, you can't accuse me of it anymore, because I'm not doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And in this industry, just like any other human industry, you got to follow the money sometimes.
And it's growing. It's growing like crazy. There are so many people. I mean, there used to be a handful of people doing it, and now there's tons of people formulating diets for dogs and for cats, and doing it in all sorts of different manners. Like, you could go to 5 different people and get 5 very different recipes.
Totally. Yeah. And again, like, if somebody wants to become a nutritionist, go for it. Go do it. Go make your money, own your own time. Like, we're totally for that. And if you, like you said, if people still want to feed that way and they feel that it's best for them and for their own pet, by all means, continue to do whatever makes you feel comfortable and confident. But you and I are going to continue to try to teach people that it doesn't have to be complicated. They literally lived off scraps. I mean, my husband and I we drove down the road the other day, and there was 2 dogs just tearing into, a deer carcass. Like, they're scavengers. They're going to eat whatever. Yeah. They're super resilient. They're very resilient animals. And I
mean, the body, it doesn't, yes, you need to account for what you're taking in to some degree, but no matter what, the body's always going to utilize what it needs from whatever you get it. It's going to store a little bit for organ reserves, even the things that people are like, nope, every day you have to make sure this is met because it's not stored. Yeah. That's not even completely true. That's kind of a half truth, because even the organs will hold on to some B vitamins. You can find B12 in people that stop eating, like people go on vegan diets. You can find B12 in the liver up to 2 years later. It is stored to some degree. I mean, the body doesn't work quite so, clean like that, where it's like it's just all gone and, nothing's there. There's always going to be some reserves in the organs, and then the body's always going to just eliminate what it doesn't need in the moment. And that's just how it works. The body's really good at maintaining that homeostatic place where it needs to stay to function well. And it's always going to work to stay in that position no matter what you give it. I mean, give it the right tools and it does a really good job. And that's what people need to be focused on, is what are the best tools for the body to do that job? And that's sticking within foods that are truly appropriate for the species. The body can do a lot more with a smaller amount of a nutrient when it's coming from an appropriate source than it can with 10 times that amount coming from an inappropriate source. Yeah. And I think that's something that you don't really get to see reflected on those spreadsheets. You're just seeing a number and it's met, but a lot of times there's no regard for just how well the body's going to use it. Right. And every body is different. They're going to utilize it differently. Well, the needs are different. The needs are different every day too. So, it's funny because that just like, it sent me down memory lane. Whenever I first started raw feeding, you always heard feed the dog in front of you. Feed the dog in front of you. And it's coming back full circle, because instead of feeding from the spreadsheet, you need to feed the dog in front of you. And so like you said, when they're armed with the appropriate foods that they need to rotate throughout the diet, they need to look at their dog and see, or their cat, and see how they're tolerating the food. Am I giving too much bone? Are they having difficulties pooping? Is it too hard? Is it white? Okay, well, maybe I need to give a little bit less bone tomorrow.
or organs. I think people tend to overfeed organs, especially liver, because you always hear that they need vitamin A. But I think the amount of liver that people are feeding, they're even feeding liver treats.
Yeah.
And I think that's causing a lot of.
Well, that's why a couple of years ago, I came up with my own ratio to feed, because that 80-10-10 just didn't cut it for me. I came up with my own. So I have my own on my website that was years ago. And liver really needs to be fed on a by protein basis. And, most people are reaching for things like beef liver because it's really easily available to everybody. It's also really, it's really nutrient dense. It's good food for the dog. Dogs generally like beef liver. But 2% is really all you need. And you start feeding too much of it, and then you start ending up with a lot of copper building up in the body. And that indirectly causes more problems with zinc than a diet that's maybe on paper slightly deficient in zinc. It's a bigger issue to be bringing in more copper. And it's just little things like that if you got out of that headspace of it's got to be 5% liver and it's got to be 5%. That's why I ditched that whole thing years ago and came up with my own, that I ran through as many different combinations as I could possibly think of with the model that I created. And it works out pretty good no matter what you feed.
Another thing people were going to clutch their pearls at is you always hear puppies have to have daily balance. And so I actually asked Dr. Billinghurst this. I was like, people are going to lose their minds when they hear that the puppies don't need daily balance and they actually did better without it. I had asked, I was like, do you have any studies? Because they're going to want the science behind that. And he simply came back with, there are no studies. There's no studies done that prove a complete imbalance is better over a complete imbalance. There's no study that shows kibble's better than raw. Like there's just nothing out there. The only thing that we can look to is evolution and how puppies were fed. They're usually the last to eat in the pack. So what's left is mainly bone, and they're not going to eat every single day. And those puppies, they grew up slower. They had less joint issues. They had less health issues, and they did perfectly fine. So this whole thing about your puppies, they need more calcium and they need daily balance. I think that's gotten out of control too, because
a lot of what we rely on when we start talking about them getting too much is based off of studies of using isolates of nutrients. So we're trying to compare using isolates of nutrients with food, and that just generally doesn't line up either, because so here's an example. People talk about feeding too much liver and you're going to get vitamin A, hypervitaminosis, right? So if you get too much vitamin A because the body stores it, that's dangerous and you could really do damage. But I got digging into that, and all of the studies on hypervitaminosis, almost all of the induced, reported clinical actual dogs and cats that have had that, it's almost all from synthetic vitamins, and it takes 1/100th of the amount coming from of synthetic to induce that. I found one instance of a person who fed a dog a liver-based diet, as in it was 80% of the dog's diet, because she didn't know better. It was food, and the dog liked liver. She fed the dog cooked liver with a little bit of other food. This was 80% of the diet, liver, every day for 2 years before the dog developed any clinical symptom of hypervitaminosis.
That's nuts.
That's a long time and a lot of liver.
A lot of liver, a lot.
But that just kind of proves the point of you can't make the same comparisons, and all of these studies are all based on these isolates of vitamins, and the body doesn't treat it the same way as it does food. It's pretty good at eliminating excess of anything when it's coming from food. It's hard to create, you see pet food recalls all the time, vitamin D, and there's too much in the food, and then what happens is dogs die. But then there are people who, I know someone who goes and does a salmon fishing trip every year, takes the dogs just gorge on the salmon all week long. I mean, if you formulated a diet, not only takes a tiny little bit of salmon to reach that vitamin D need, and these dogs will spend the entire week eating nothing but salmon all day, every day.
Yeah. If
you were to give that same amount of vitamin D that they're getting from that salmon every day, you would have a very sick dog at the end of the week.
Absolutely.
So it's not the same. We have to stop trying to make this lateral comparison between a vitamin when it's coming from a synthetic source versus coming from a food, because the body's not processing it the same way. So there's a lot of fear in that aspect too with those type of things, and I don't think people really realize that. The liver thing shocked me, because I would have thought long before 2 years that would have been a problem. I just wonder what this dog's stool looked like.
I don't want to know.
But the point of the story is, it took 2 years of feeding a predominantly liver diet to show up as a clinical manifestation of too much vitamin A in the system.
Yeah. And that just shows how incredible the body is at trying to keep homeostasis. It's going to keep what it needs, and it's going to try to excrete what it doesn't. So it's feeding by a spreadsheet it just makes no sense to me, because the body doesn't work like that, and real food doesn't work like that.
It's nutritional Narnia, I call it.
Yeah.
Because it's not real. It's fantasy land. It doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't. And more people need to realize that. So I hope that our little podcast can help more people understand what the industry is not talking about for whatever reason. I don't know. I know that other nutritionists are seeing health issues, and it just bugs me that they're not talking about it. But I get it. It's a livelihood.
I think it's easy to have blinders on too.
I think so too.
Because the more, and I fell down the hole of, like nutrition science fascinates me, which is why I ended up doing this job. Yeah. But it's very easy to kind of fall down the hole of, when you start learning all the intricacies of nutrition, to fall into this trap of believing that things have to be really complicated and nutrients all interact with each other. So we have to be really careful of this, and we have to really watch this, and you have to, it's very, very easy to fall down that hole and really get wrapped up in it, and to start to try to bring all of that onto your paper and into your software when you're formulating a diet. And you can make yourself crazy doing it. And believe me, I made myself, me too, obviously. It's very easy to do. But you got to pull yourself back and kind of look at it like
the bigger picture.
Yeah, it's not what it seems. It's a bit fantasy land, to be honest.
Yeah, it is. All right. I think we are at about an hour. I'm sure we can go on about this for days. Is there anything else you want to add to today's discussion?
No, nothing specifically. I don't think. We kind of covered everything that I wanted to talk about.
Okay. Awesome. Well, if everybody could go to we're going to upload this to YouTube like always. If you guys can go like and subscribe it, that would mean the world to us. It means more pet parents get to see what we're talking about. And if you have any comments or questions, please leave them down on the YouTube channel, and we will get back to answering those. And if you guys like if you have a certain topic that you want to talk about that we brought up today, please leave those in the comments as well so we can discuss, you know, the different topics that you guys are wanting to hear about. So until next week, I hope everybody has a great week, and we will talk to you soon. All right. Bye, Erin.
Bye.